Hello everyone, Ciantier here with the next part of the Guild Wars 1 skill review project for Necromancer. This time we are talking about Death Magic. Death Magic has a nice, lovely 42 skills. Also, I'm doing this with 12 attributes, but note that a lot of the time I'm actually going to have 16 in Death Magic to try to optimize the number of minions I can make, because Death Magic does, every 2 ranks of Death Magic increases the number of minions you can summon by 1. So if you have 0 Death Magic, you can have 2 minions. At 2 Death Magic, you can have 3. That builds up to, at 16 Death Magic, you can have 10. If you can get up to 18 Death Magic, spoilers, you can, but not through Death Magic, through Soul Reaping. You can get up to 18, and that allows you to have 11 minions. So, excuse me. So just know that a lot of the time, I do want Death Magic to be higher. That said, with AI, I'm off, like with heroes, I'm often not totally speccing them out completely with runes and everything. So it's not uncommon for them to only have the 12 or the 14 Death Magic that they can get with the enchantment Masochism, which is in Soul Reaping. Anyway, we're going to go ahead and go through Death Magic here. So let's go ahead and start with Animate Bone Fiend. So basically our first 7 skills are all reanimation skills, interestingly enough, just because they all start with the word animate and it's alphabetically sorted. So Animate Bone Fiend is 25 energy, 3-second cast time, 5-second recharge. Spell, exploit nearest corpse to animate a level 14 Bone Fiend. Bone Fiends can attack at range. Now, as a reminder, I showed this in the intro, but minions don't have a set duration per se, but over time they increase in health degeneration all the way up to the cap of 10, I believe, which is 20 HP per second, so they're going to be really loose in their HP. But they start off just fine. They don't have any health degen when they first spawn, and then they slowly build it up over time. So that's an important consideration with minions. They do have a shelf life that you can try to extend through skills like Blood of the Master that we'll talk about later. Anyway, Bone Fiends are actually really good. This is one of the minions that I tend to go with quite often because they attack at range. This means that they're much better at attacking things when they don't have to run up to stuff. They are more expensive at 25 energy. You can afford that as a Necromancer because you only get these when things are dying anyway. And if you're a Minion Master, which is a very strong build and one of the things to do, this is one of the top choices. I'm going to give it a 4. I don't always bring it, but if I am being a Minion Master, I'm almost always bringing Animate Bone Fiend, just because that ranged attack is so good with minions. That brings us to Animate Bone Horror. 10 energy, 3-second cast time, 5-second recharge. Spell, exploit nearest corpse to animate a level 14 Bone Horror. Obviously, more Death Magic increases the level because that number is green. And that makes them stronger, more durable, things like that. I like this one decently well. I'm not always going to bring it or anything, but it's perfectly serviceable. Most of the Animate spells are ones that I'm happy to bring in different circumstances. So this one is, again, it's one that I'm happy with. I will pick Bone Fiend and Shambling Horror ahead of this most of the time, but I'm going to go ahead and give this one a 4 as well. I'm quite happy to create Bone Horrors. The energy cost is very nice on it as well. Animate Bone Minions. 15 energy, 3-second cast time, 5-second recharge. Spell, exploit nearest corpse to animate 2 level 10 Bone Minions. So Bone Minions are significantly lower in level. You'll note that these guys are all 14. This is only 10. That is definitely a negative impact, but you do get 2 minions for the price of 1 corpse, which is more efficient. They do look like Bone Horrors, by the way. I don't know why the skill icon, which you can see on my bar, is the icon that it is. Here we are. Bone Minions will make it onto my bar sometimes. It's less common. I'm going to give it a 3, but it's a 3 with an asterisk in that it's kind of a 4, but the only reason why it's a 3 is because Bone Fiend, Bone Horror, and Shambling Horror get on my bar significantly more commonly than Bone Minions does. Bone Bone Minions also does have a really interesting build with, of all things, ritualists. We'll go into that a bit more, but ritualists have skills that trigger when you create things. So animating Bone Minions is creating a thing and triggers those spells. So that's a really cool, interesting build. We will talk about that more when we get to Ritualist, because it's the Ritualist skills that are really the workhorse of that. But just be aware that that is something that you can do with Animate Bone Minions, where it works especially well. But the simple fact of the matter is, like, if I'm doing a standard Minion Master type Necromancer, I'm going to want my minions to be beefier than what Animate Bone Minions produces. So it's going to be a lower choice just because of that. Animate Flesh Golem. 10 energy, 3-second cast time, 30-second recharge. It is an elite spell. Exploit nearest corpse to animate a level 21 Flesh Golem. The Flesh Golem leaves an exploitable corpse, but you can only have one Flesh Golem at a time. That only one at a time is a huge downside. Of course, when it dies, you can reanimate the Flesh Golem from it, so that's okay. It is also notably higher level than other minions. So these guys are all level 14. This is a full 7 levels higher at level 21. And of course, more death magic will increase its level even further. Having higher level means it hits harder, it's much tankier. That's really what it comes down to, right? It hits harder and it's much tankier. Most minions are immune to bleed, poison, and disease because they are not fleshy. This guy is fleshy. That's why it leaves an exploitable corpse. It is vulnerable to those conditions, if I remember correctly. So, this is a fine skill. It's an okay elite, but I don't feel like, as a Minion Master, I need it. Bone Horrors, Shambling Horrors, and Bone Fiends are perfectly serviceable. So, I don't usually bring this with Minion Masters. I'm going to give this a 3. I think it's a fine elite. Even if you're not really going minion heavy, I think it's a perfectly fine elite, but there are other options, and I'm not like sold on, ooh, Flesh Golems are so awesome that I always want them. So it's kind of like, it's the elite you put on your bar because it's an elite that makes a minion, not because it actually does something you really care about that much. It is a better minion, but like, here's the thing. Bone Fiends are probably better DPS than Flesh Golem because Flesh Golem is still melee and Bone Fiends are ranged. So being a ranged attacker gives them a bit better DPS because they don't have to run around chasing things. They can just aim and fire. The Flesh Golem is tankier and stuff, but that doesn't matter that much. Minions are kind of like, the melee minions are more there not for damage, but to be like AI distractions. They're sponges. They absorb damage. Yes, they deal additional damage, and that's really good. But the minions that you bring that are melee are more there for distraction, as a distraction to capture the AI and keep damage off of your actual party members that matter. So from that standpoint, the Flesh Golem is nice, but not amazing, in my personal opinion. I like Animate Shambling Horror quite a bit, however. So this is 15 energy, 3-second cast time, 25-second recharge, which is quite long. And so this is Exploit the Nearest Corpse. It's a spell to create a level 14 Shambling Horror. When the Shambling Horror dies, it is replaced by a level 12 Jagged Horror that causes bleeding with each of its attacks. So I bring this almost every single time I do minions. I'm going to give this a 5 just because of that. Animate Bone Fiends is like really close, but like I can sometimes see leaving this off and bringing like Bone Horror and Shambling Horror. The thing is, the Shambling Horror leaving that additional minion when it dies really gives it some additional longevity, and the additional bleed that they apply is nice. When you're getting bleeding for effectively free, it is nice. Like, I know that I talk about how it's very unexciting, and it is very unexciting, but free bleeding? Yeah, I'll take that. Note that this also combos nicely with Ulcerous Lungs from Curses. So I definitely like this one quite a lot. That brings us to Animate Vampiric Horror. 15 energy, 3-second cast time, 15-second recharge. Spell, exploit nearest corpse to animate a level 14 vampiric horror. Whenever vampiric horror you control deals damage, you gain the same amount of health. So basically, it's like a vampire, and it heals you when it deals damage. I never use this. It's probably okay, but by the time, like... So if I'm making a Minion Master, I'm probably bringing Animate Bone Fiend, Animate Bone Horror, and Animate Shambling Horror, and at that point I don't really feel like I need more Animate spells. And so this one's like, it's nice. I'm going to give it a 3. I think it's a very nice effect. But, like, frankly, I just don't use it. So... It's certainly nice with Blood of the Master. Blood of the Master is really important with minions because it allows you to heal your minions. But it costs you a bunch of health to do that. This can offset some of that. And I've heard that this works really nicely with Order of Undeath, which makes your minions deal more damage but costs you health whenever they hit. And obviously, if they're gaining you health, that offsets that damage. So... I've heard that they can be nice there. I've not really tried that sort of build myself. And so I'm not terribly excited by them. The thing is, there's only so many minion spells that you want to bring with you, and just to me, Animate Vampiric Horror is kind of the bottom rung of those. So, you might have a different opinion. That's cool. I'm fine with that. Aura of the Lich. I mentioned this a bunch when I was talking about blood magic because it changed at a point in time. It originally was like you have half HP but take half or lose half as much life, something like that. I remember it worked with Sacrifice where you took like quarter from Sacrifice of what you originally would have lost because it halved your health and then it decreased the damage you took. That was really interesting. That was really gimmicky, but it wasn't especially powerful. And I think this Aura of the Lich is a lot better. It's a lot more interesting. It is 15 energy, 2-second cast time, 45-second recharge, which is hefty. It is an elite enchantment spell. All corpses within earshot are exploited, and you animate a level 14 Bone Horror +1 for each corpse exploited in this way. For 37 seconds, your death magic attribute is increased by 1. Increasing your death magic attribute like that is nice. It makes a bunch of your minions a little bit stronger. I believe if you get high enough, you can keep that additional up all the time. This is super fun to use if there's a bunch of corpses there, because boom, massive reanimation. I find this to be a fun elite. I don't tend to use it that often on my Minion Masters, just because I like... So Minion Master as a build is not one that intrinsically requires an elite to work. There's a bunch of builds where it's like they need an elite to work, or there's some elite in their attributes that is like super fantastic. And Minion Master, like, you can do a build, just to kind of give you a little bit of an idea, like something along the lines of that. This right here is all you really need for Minion Master sort of base. And none of that requires any elites. So there are a bunch of elites that work with Minion Master that you can bring. There's some generic stuff like Icy Veins that is just, yeah, that's nice. And that I'm happy to bring. And there's some other elites in other professions that I like. There's a monk elite, actually, that this character might have. Or there's a monk elite that this character should go get. That does some small healy stuff, but is better because of cleaning up. We'll talk about it when we get to monk. That I actually quite like on Minion Master, just because Minion Master just does not have an elite requirement. So Aura of the Lich is really nice, and I'm happy to run it on a Minion Master, but it's hardly an automatic slot in for me. Keep in mind, you can only control so many minions at once. If you're animating a bunch of them, increasing by 1 does not allow you to animate an additional minion unless you already were running at an odd number of attribute points for some reason. Which, like I said, is quite peculiar. You can get up to 16 with runes and such. And then Masochism adds a raw 2, so you're not getting to an odd number that way. So it doesn't actually increase the number of minions you can control. So while it's a lot of fun, while it can animate a bunch of minions, which can be really nice, pick me up after a battle that might have wiped them out, it's to me far from an auto include on a Minion Master build, just because like I don't need the effect, and raising that many minions. So when you raise new minions and the cap is met, it will kill off your oldest minions first. So I don't necessarily want that. I don't necessarily want to replace, say, if I have a bunch of Shambling Horrors and Bone Fiends that I've been keeping alive, I don't necessarily want to replace them with a bunch of Bone Horrors. Bone Horrors are perfectly fine, don't get me wrong, but they're kind of the most standard minion, and something like a Bone Fiend is definitely superior to them. So it's a fine spell. I'm going to give it a 4, in part because it is very powerful and in part because it is very fun, but I don't actually bring it on my Minion Masters all that often, just because I don't need the effect. So, Bitter Chill. Man, this is so... It makes me think of Smiting Prayers. But anyway, it is 5 energy, 1 second cast time, 10 second recharge spell. Target foe struck for 51 cold damage. If that foe had more health than you, Bitter Chill recharges instantly. I don't use this. I feel like this is okay. It's certainly not the most efficient. The issue is that it's really bad at killing enemies. You don't want to be at low health, is really what it comes down to. I'm going to give this a 3. I feel like it's, like I said, it's okay, but it's not what I'm trying to do, if that makes sense. In that, like, I typically want to have more health than my enemies, not less. So, yeah. And the damage on it is quite low, and it cares about armor. Those both are kind of bad. So, Blood of the Master. So it says that it's a 5% life sacrifice. That's a little bit misleading. We'll get into why in a moment. It is 5 energy, 1 second cast time, 2 second recharge spell. All of your undead allies are healed for 99 health. You sacrifice an additional 2% maximum health per minion healed in this way. So if you have your 10 minions, you're sacrificing 25% health. However, it says all of your undead allies, if that includes another Necromancer's minions, yes, it will heal those, and you'll lose 2% for those. So just keep that in mind. Typically, you don't want 2 Minion Masters anyway because they're fighting for corpses, but there is Vizuna Square, for example. If you go into that map and have one of the AI companions, I forget if it's from... if you're joined from Foreign Quarter, I think it's from Foreign Quarter if you join, that one of the local quarter AI henchmen will bring minions, and Blood of the Master will heal those minions too. So in Vizuna Square, it's not uncommon to see your Necromancers lose a lot of health to healing their minions. This used to not be the most popular skill. You used to see a lot of Vrada's Sacrifice right here, but Vrada's Sacrifice was deeply nerfed. And Blood of the Master was made a lot better. So Blood of the Master is like the skill you bring with minions to keep them alive. I'm going to give it a 5 from that standpoint. Like, if you are a Minion Master, you are probably bringing Blood of the Master. That's not 100% guaranteed. And the skill in and of itself is not, like, exciting. It's just, this is how you keep all of your minions alive, and it's basically stapled to a Minion Master's bar. That 5 is a little misleading in that regard, but, because I'm never bringing it if I'm not doing minion stuff. And I'm not 100% bringing it every single time I do something with a little bit of minion dabbling. But if I'm going full on Minion Master, this is an incredibly important part of the build. So that's just kind of how it fits in. Consume Corpse. This is 10 energy, 1 second cast time, no recharge. You'll see why in a moment. It is a spell. You exploit a random corpse. It says random target, but that target is a corpse, and you don't target it yourself. You teleport to that corpse's location and gain 85 health and 17 energy. This is, technically anyone can use this, and it is energy negative. You'll gain energy from it. I don't see this randomly used very often. I'm going to give this a 3. Just because I feel like gaining, like, as energy management, it's not terrible. It is. You do have to have enough energy to be able to make that initial investment. It would be better if it was -5 energy required and gained. So if it was gained 12 energy for 5 energy cost. 3 is maybe a little high, but I kind of don't... I don't know. I'm fine with it there. At one point in time, this was a true teleport, where it would set your position regardless, like it wouldn't do any pathing checking. I do not know if it was at some point changed to be a shadow step or not. I feel like I've heard that it has been. It doesn't really matter much to me because that's mostly irrelevant. The only reason why that matters is in the Dunes of Despair mission, I want to say. You could use that to be able to get outside of the mission's main area early to be able to explore stuff without a timer, which could be useful. I don't know if that's still possible or not. Shadow steps, basically, they're teleports that do a pathing check first. So they basically say, can I reasonably path to this target? If so, then I teleport there. True teleports, like Consume Corpse, at least was, Necrotic Traversal, which we will see a bit later, and Rebirth were all true teleports, at least at one point in time in the game. They did not do any sort of checks. They're just like, that is now your position. So I don't know if that was changed or not. For the vast majority of play, it's completely irrelevant whether or not they, like, which way they work. So, yeah, I don't know. This feels like it could be reasonable energy management. Just keep in mind that it's kind of moving you up to the front line, potentially, so it's questionable if you want to use it on, like, a monk or something. It's a fun effect to play with. 3 is probably a little high for it, but I'm going to leave it there. Contagion. 5 energy, 1 second cast time, 20 second recharge, elite enchantment spell. For 60 seconds, whenever you suffer from a new condition, all foes in the area suffer from that same condition, and you sacrifice 6% maximum health. It works nicely with Dark Aura, I guess. So I don't know when I would want to use this. I feel like you have to be doing some sort of, either you're going to an area where there's a lot of conditions being thrown around and you're like on a melee attacker and you want to be able to spread them around everywhere. Keep in mind this doesn't heal you from them, it just copies it, right? Or you're doing some weird, like, I'm wandering into an area and self-applying conditions, but that's kind of limited. Like, it's limited how many things self-apply conditions. So I don't know. I feel like this is a 2 because I feel like there are ways that you can try to build around this. I just don't know that there are any good ones. It isn't a really interesting effect, though, and I like the sort of space that it's playing with. It's just taking up your elite slot for that is really questionable to me, and it feels like it's kind of... it feels like it's made elite because the effect is powerful sounding and very unique, and it's more that it's because it's very unique rather than as good. So, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I could see this potentially working in a build that's trying to spread conditions around in the hopes that you're going to have conditions on you. I definitely wouldn't do that without expecting conditions to be placed on me. It could be reasonable in the Echovold Forest where there's a lot of like bleed and stuff being thrown around. I don't know, you can give it a try. Dark Aura. 10 energy, 1 second cast time, 10 second recharge, enchantment spell for 30 seconds whenever target ally, which can be yourself, sacrifices health. Dark Aura deals 41 damage to adjacent foes, and you lose 17 health. I feel like this works really nicely with Touch of Agony and Wallow's Bite, so you could combo this with those to get actual damage out of them and AoE and stuff. I wouldn't really use it outside of that. It's a 2 to me. Like I said, it can technically work with Contagion because, oh, you sacrificed health when you got a new condition, and now it deals some additional damage. I feel like this could be a really interesting part of some sort of like build around me sort of scenario. I like this sort of effect in that it triggers off of an interesting thing, and it makes you kind of sit back and go, oh, I need to reevaluate all these health sacrifice skills. I note that there aren't a ton of health sacrifice skills in Death Magic, although the ones that are seem to all be about minions. But anyway, it's not. It's much more of a blood magic thing, life sacrifice. But anyway, so I can see trying to play with Dark Aura in that sort of situation. You can maybe make something fun with it, but it's definitely kind of a unique build around me, and certainly not something I would just throw on a bar. Death Nova. 5 energy, 2 second cast time, enchantment spell for 30 seconds. If target ally dies, all adjacent foes take 85 damage and are poisoned for 15 seconds. So this is really powerful with minions. That said, it is a gigantic pain in the butt to use with minions, even with the minion panel. Before the minion panel was an utter nightmare, but even with the minion panel, it's kind of a pain in the rear end to do yourself. Heroes can use it quite well, but note that they will spam it on anyone they think is in imminent danger of dying, including you. And whatnot. So it can be kind of energy intensive. It is not like a last second thing. This would be more exciting if it was quarter second cast time, but that might be a little strong as well. It has no recharge, so you can kind of just spam it on things to keep it up. It is really nice on minions because they will inevitably die, and this makes them deal a lot of armor ignoring damage, and the lengthy poison is nice. But I don't often bring this. I don't dislike it. I just don't typically bring it. I'm going to give it a 3 because of that. But I think it is a very worthwhile skill to consider including if you are bringing minions. So, a strong choice. I wouldn't not typically bring this without minions just because I don't want to bet on my party members dying. Like, it's kind of like Retreat in that regard, in that you don't want to bring a skill that's only good when something you don't want to have happen happens, if that makes sense. That's typically the case. The exception to that is, like, I want to bring resurrection skills because it's much more important to get my ally up. But, like, I'm not going to go into battle being like, okay, time to Death Nova everybody up so that way they can die. It's just not what I want to do. But minions are going to die, and it's perfectly fine if they die, so Death Nova is great with them. And I like skills that combo with minions nicely in that way. Deathly Chill. So, actually, before we move on, Death Nova also works especially well with Animate Bone Minions in the Ritualist build that I was mentioning earlier, because you might just want to make minions to, like, raise them up, deal damage, drop Death Novas on them, and then have them die to deal more damage. Anyway, Deathly Chill. This is 10 energy, 1 second cast time, 5 second recharge spell. Target foe is struck for 41 cold damage. If that foe's health is above 50%, you deal an additional 41 shadow damage, which is armor ignoring. This one's okay. I'm going to give it a 3. I'm not the biggest fan because the 41 cold damage is unexciting. This is very similar, if you remember, in Blood Magic, which I don't have any spec in right now, so let's fix that. If you remember over here in Blood Magic, we had Lifebane Strike, which also dealt 41 damage, 10 energy, and dealt an additional 41 if they're above 50%. Now, this is going to deal more damage reliably, but the other one has a third the recharge, excuse me. I was thinking it's 5 recharge instead of 15, but that's a third. So Lifebane Strike takes more time to recharge than Deathly Chill. Deathly Chill also casts a little bit faster, which is nice, but the armor respecting damage isn't great. I feel like it's a 3, though, just because the recharge is slow enough that I can kind of use it with some regularity. That said, it's going to be outpaced by Deathly Swarm a lot of the time. Like, I'm going to kind of prefer this. So Deathly Swarm is 10 energy, 2 second cast time, 6 second recharge spell. Deathly Swarm flies out slowly and strikes. I don't know why it says slowly. It does have a delay between each time it hits. And it strikes for 78 cold damage on up to 3 targets in the area. So this is a fine AoE cold damage spell. It's not, like, amazing, but it does do decent damage. It has a lowish energy cost for an AoE skill that deals okay damage, lowish recharge. I'm going to give this a 3 as well. I am going to tend to bring it over Deathly Chill. Deathly Chill is unexciting, but not, like, wretched. Deathly Swarm is also fairly unexciting. It has a really cool animation where, like, hits and then hits and then hits, because there's, like, a bit of a gap between each hit and something like that. This is really nice in PvE to be able to have this along with some of the other stuff from Necromancer. You get this really early, so this is great in pre-steering Ascalon. I don't know. That's kind of what I got to say about it. Nice standard effect, somewhat unexciting. This, by the way, came before Vampiric Swarm, which, if you remember, was up here, Vampiric Swarm. And Vampiric Swarm is clearly directly inspired by Deathly Swarm. Arguably, this can be a bit better because it's armor-ignoring damage and heals you. Deathly Swarm is better in areas with lower armor. Discord. So this is a messaging chat program, kind of like IRC. No, Discord is 5 energy, 1 second cast time, 2 second recharge, very low. It is an elite spell. If target foe is suffering from a condition and under the effects of a hex or an enchantment, that foe suffers 94 armor ignoring damage. So Discord is extremely powerful single target damage with very low recharge, very low energy cost, perfectly fine casting time, but pretty stringent requirements, though meetable. It is worth jumping through those hoops. I'm going to give this a 4. I don't often bring this, quite honestly, but it is very good, especially in like hard mode or higher level areas where that armor ignoring damage is really, really nice. On a recharge that low is stellar. It definitely was at some point in time kind of a meta thing to do, to bring a lot of Discord, just because of its ability to cut through things with its armor ignoring damage. So this is very powerful elite and well worth using because of that, if perhaps a little boring to use, but certainly very effective on like heroes and stuff. Feast for the Dead. 5 energy, quarter second cast time, 10 second recharge, spell, destroy target animated undead ally. The reason why I specify as animated is if you have an undead ally in your party that's not animated, they don't want you to be able to just kill it with Feast for the Dead. Just to clarify that. All of your other animated undead allies are healed for 82 health. So this basically is like, hey, all of you guys eat that guy. This is finicky to use well. It certainly combos with something like Death Nova. You Death Nova something and then Feast for the Dead it. That's okay, but... or you could Jagged Bones it too. I'm not a big fan of this. I typically will use Blood of the Master. Technically, this is a way to kind of try to keep your minions alive, but it's a very attrition-y way of doing it. So I'm not a big fan. I'm going to give this a 2. I think there's some build stuff you can do with it. It technically does its job, but I'm not excited by it. I'm not really interested in it. So yeah, I don't know if I've ever really used this. So Fetid Ground. 5 energy, 3/4 second cast time, 10 second recharge spell. Target foe is struck for 55 cold damage. If that foe is knocked down, that foe becomes poisoned for 17 seconds. I really like the design of this skill. It's really interesting. I don't use this skill. I could see using it on like an assassin or a warrior with a knockdown skill, or with Gale. Use Gale to knock down an enemy and then Fetid Ground them. It's definitely not worth it if you're not getting the poison, and it's a bit finicky. So I'm going to give this a 2, because I do feel like you have to build around this if you want to use it. I'd honestly rather use Bitter Chill if I am not getting the poison. So I'm not a big fan of this one, but I do like the design. I think the design is really interesting. So it is interesting to me that there's a bunch of cold damage in death magic, for what that's worth. Infuse Condition. 5 energy, 1 second cast time, 20 second recharge, enchantment spell. For the next 51 seconds, whenever you receive a condition, that condition is transferred to your closest minion instead. So this one is one I should probably consider a little bit more often with a draw condition type of skill. Foul Feast, I guess. Because, so the skills that transfer all conditions to you, and then, oh wait, no, they all got transferred to my nearest minion, that's pretty sweet. I'm happy to be like, yeah, I'm going to just chuck all these conditions to the minions. It doesn't matter. Could be real fun with Martyr. which is a monk elite that I actually noticed that I have on this character. Martyr is just transfer all conditions and the remaining durations from your allies to you. That works really nicely with this because it allows you to be able to be like, hey, nearest minion, you get all of the conditions we are suffering from. That said, I don't really use this. I'm going to give this a 3 because I think it's reasonable. You do have to build around it some, so maybe it's a 2 because it's like not amazing if you're not built. You know what? Yeah, I just talked myself into making this a 2. I do think you really do need to build around like it's. So I don't think it's just worth it to be like, yeah, okay, conditions. All of my conditions go to my nearest minion. I think you want to be transferring conditions from your party to your nearest minion, and that does require you to be building specifically in that way. So that's why I decided to drop it down to a 2, because it's not like just a skill would consider throwing on a bar. I don't think all of my conditions are going to my nearest minion is good enough to just toss onto a bar, but I think all of my conditions are going to the nearest minion, and also I'm taking the conditions from my party to be able to transfer the nearest minion. That's pretty cool. Jagged Bones, 5 energy, 1 second cast time, 15-second recharge, elite enchantment spell for 30 seconds. Whenever target undead servant dies, so that's an animated undead, it's a minion. When it dies, it is replaced by a level 12 Jagged Horror that causes bleeding with each of its attacks. So this is the same Jagged Horror that Animate Shambling Horror creates. I don't ever really use this. The AI can use it okay. You do want things to be dying when you're putting this on them, or it's kind of a waste. I'm just as happy to get them from this. It does give additional longevity to your minions, technically, but I don't know. I'm not terribly excited by it. If it had a slightly lower recharge, it would be a bit more interesting. But even then, like, the main reason why it needs a recharge is that way you just can't keep, like, recycling the same minion over and over again. It does make Feast for the Dead better to like, oh, I'm Jagged Bonesing it and then exploding it. Then at least you get something out of it. I don't know. I don't think it's bad per se. I'm gonna give it a 2 because it does require you to be running minions to do any good. Like by itself, it does nothing. Whereas like, so just some of my logic and thinking here is I have to bring minions to make this work. But I can just bring a minion without having to bring other stuff, and it's useful. So, but you do have to bring a minion to make this work, and without that is completely useless. And I'm unexcited by it even with them. Although I have seen it be part of that ritualist build I was mentioning. Although I think Aura of the Lich is a strong contender for that build too. Malign Intervention. 10 energy, 1 second cast time, 5 second recharge. Hex spell for 17 seconds. Target foe receives 20% less benefit from healing. And if that foe dies while hexed with Malign Intervention, a level 14 Masterless Bone Horror is summoned. So when it says Masterless, it means it's aggressive with everything. It'll fight your team and the enemy team. That's not really desirable. There is a skill, Rada's Gaze, right here, that allows you to be able to gain control of a masterless undead. But here's Malign Intervention. That's a little bit of additional work. Like, again, reducing the effectiveness of healing is not something I'm terribly excited by. Making a minion like this is really dubious as well. It's a cool idea. It's a very flavorful effect. It's just not as practical as you want it to be. So, I necessarily am going to give it a low score of 2. Because I think you can try to build stuff with it. And reducing healing is useful, I guess. But it is, in my opinion, a bit underwhelming. Reminds me of some magic cards that are like -1/-1 health, and when it dies, you get a mirror or whatever it is. Necrotic Traversal. This is 5 energy, 3/4 second cast time, no recharge. Spell, exploit a random corpse. You teleport to that corpse location, and all nearby foes become poisoned for 17 seconds. This is fun. I'm going to give it a 2 because it's fun, but it's not especially useful. I think Consume Corpse, which serves as health and health regain and energy management by giving you a bunch of energy, is more useful than this one. Obviously, this one's cheaper to use initially, but it's kind of finicky to use. Poison is nice, but again, like conditions are useful to be stacking up, and so it's not bad to be able to have sources of conditions, to be clear. But health regen conditions like this, like, there are other ways you can apply poisons. This is a clunky one, so it's certainly not my first choice for doing that sort of thing. And that's kind of where all of this falls. But like I said, it's fun skill. Order of Undeath. 10 energy, 1 second cast time, 5 second recharge. It is an order, so as you'd expect, in this case it's an elite spell, but as you expect, it lasts for 5 seconds. So for 5 seconds, your minions deal plus 13 damage, but you lose 2% of your maximum health whenever one of your minions hits with an attack. So this can add a lot of damage to enemies, but also to you. So like I mentioned earlier, it works well with the vampiric minion that gains you health. I don't really use this. It can get you a bunch of damage, but that's not often why I'm using minions. I'm going to give this a 2, just because, like, if you're doing stuff with minions, it's going to be really powerful, but you have to have minions for it to do anything. So, put bluntly, I would rather increase my minion damage through Barbs, which is not an elite and does not cost me health, and through Mark of Pain, which does some AoE stuff, which, again, is not an elite, doesn't cost me health. This is a nice idea, but it's energy intensive, it's health intensive, it's not quite what I'm trying to do per se. Often my minions are less damage and more sponges. The other thing is Barbs can work with, like, melee attackers and rangers and stuff. They can work with your physical attackers as well as your minions, whereas Order of Undeath only works with your minions, so I'm not terribly excited by it. But I think it's a reasonable idea for an elite. It's just not quite what I'm wanting to do. Putrid Bile. This is 10 energy, 1 second cast time, 12 second recharge, hex spell for 17 seconds. Target foe suffers -3 health regeneration. If that foe dies while under the effects of this hex, all nearby foes take 73 armor ignoring damage. You bring this because of that clause, right? You put this on somebody, and then when they die, everything goes boom. I quite like Putrid Bile in that regard. I'm going to give this a 4. I often throw it on my bar when I'm in Death Magic, just because that additional area of effect damage, and nearby is a pretty nice area of effect size too, is nice additional pressure. The health regen is a nice little bonus, but you know, it's not a huge deal. Fairly low recharge. I'm generally happy with this one. It's not the most exciting skill in the world, but it does a nice cool effect. So here we are. I like the things like this though that can trigger death effects like this. So yeah. Putrid Explosion. 10 energy, 1 second cast time, 5 second recharge. Spell. The corpse nearest your target explodes. So if you're targeting an enemy, it's the corpse nearest to the targeted enemy. If you're targeting an ally, I guess it'd be the one nearest to them. But anyway, the corpse explodes, sending out a shockwave that deals 101 damage to your nearby foes. That nearby is nearby to the corpse that exploded, just to be clear. And an exploding corpse is exploited. It doesn't explicitly say that, but it exploits the corpse. So I don't use this. I'm going to give this a 3 because I think this is a pretty reasonable source of damage. It has a fairly low recharge. It does require dead things to kind of do stuff, but basically you can kind of get a chain going where, oh, you kill a thing, now you get a bunch of additional damage on things around you. The biggest knock against this, honestly, is that it's in Death Magic, and more often than not, if I'm in Death Magic, I want to be making minions, not blowing up the fuel for them. And that's really a large part of why I don't use this. It's a large part of why I do not use the wells in Death Magic. I'm more interested in making minions in Death Magic. That's why I go to Death Magic than I am in using some of these other effects. So that's just kind of where it comes down. Putrid Flesh. 10 energy, quarter second, cast time, no recharge. Spell. Destroy one of your target animated undead minions. You can only target one thing at a time, so I don't know why it says that. Might as well just say destroy target animated undead minion. All foes near that creature are diseased for 13 seconds. So this is playing around in that space of blowing up your own minions for fun and profit. You probably want to do this with Death Nova. I'm going to give this a 2. I do think this is actually kind of exciting with Death Nova, because you put Death Nova on the minion, and then you explode it with this, and that makes all of the enemies near that minion suddenly have 8 health degen for a decent period of time. This is 13 seconds at this rank, but keep in mind that's generally going to be higher. and I'm off. Death Nova is 15 seconds, if I remember correctly. I can go check. Yeah, 15 seconds. So that's a good bit of additional damage that way. That's certainly interesting to me, that sort of minion bomber strategy. I might consider that also on the Ritualist build that I was talking about earlier. This can be a nice piece of that and kind of a minion bombery thing where it's like, oh, I animate these minions and that deals damage, and then I enchant them with Death Nova and blow them up and that deals damage and poisons and diseases you and all that sort of thing. That's really cool. One caveat about disease, and that'll come up when we talk about rotting flesh as well, because this also just inflicts disease, is that disease spreads to like creatures. In other words, creatures of the same type. So if it's like an imp, all other imps near it that get like adjacent to it or whatever can become diseased. This is does not care about alliedness. So if you are fighting human enemies, such as factions is full of, for example, or like White Mantle or things like that, and you disease them, that disease can spread to your party. So that's just something to be aware of. Now, when disease spreads, it retains the duration that it had when it spread, I believe. So it's not like, oh, it's going to keep going indefinitely and whatnot. But that's just something to be aware of. You may want to use disease with some caution, is all I'm really trying to say with that. But Putrid Flesh is cool for that particular like exploding minion build and applying a bunch of pressure that way, because disease by itself is not exciting, but disease plus poison, that does get exciting. Rising Bile. 10 energy, 1 second cast time, 20 second recharge, hex spell. For 20 seconds, this hex does nothing. When Rising Bile ends, that foe and all foes in the area take 5 damage for each second Rising Bile was in effect. My impression of this is that this hexes all foes in that area with Rising Bile, and each one gets their own copy. But anyway, I don't use this much. At full damage, this is going to deal 100 armor ignoring damage. If this is removed early, it does deal the amount of damage for however long it was around. This is a really interesting design to me, because you want to try to get to it as soon as possible to minimize the damage it deals. If you delay in removing it, it is going to deal more damage. Like, if you get to this after 2 seconds, it's going to deal 10 damage. If you get to this after 10 seconds, it's going to deal 50. So that's just something to keep in mind with how this is designed and how it works. It's a cool design. I don't tend to use it much. It's very slow. And that's really what the problem is. It is very, 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 very slow to deal its damage. It takes 20 seconds to actually deal its damage if it's not removed early, and if it's removed early, it's dealing less damage. So I don't tend to use it from that standpoint. It does have a nice big area of effect, which is cool. If it is on single target, then that single target... actually, let's try concise descriptions to see if that makes it a little bit clearer. End effect deals 5 damage for each second. In effect, also damages other foes in the area. So I think this might be on a thing. So it could be interesting if you put it on something, they die, and this goes off and deals area of effect around them. I thought I understood how this one works, and now I kind of want to test it. So I'm going to throw it on my bar and try to remember to test it later after I kind of go through the rest of these. But for now, I'm not... You know what? So, okay, so this is important enough, sort of the functioning of this, but I don't really want to... Tell you what. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make a little note here to test Rising Bile. And I'm going to go ahead and test this in the last video on... which is actually going to be the next one. I'm going to combine Soul Reaping, PvE only, and no attribute, just because otherwise I'd have a video of 4 skills, and that just seems a bit silly. So at the end of the next video, I'm going to go ahead and test Rising Bile, because if this goes off when the target dies, it becomes more interesting and deals AoE damage. If it hexes all of those enemies, it becomes less interesting to me. So one of those is like a 2, and the other of those is like a 3. So I need to test it to kind of get an accurate feeling for how I would rate this. Okay, let's go ahead and move on. Rotting Flesh is 15 energy, 3 second cast time, 3 second recharge, which is pretty low recharge. Very long cast time, though. Spell, target fleshy foe becomes diseased for 22 seconds, slowly losing health. Saying that fleshy foe is completely redundant. Only fleshy foes can be diseased. And, of course, it makes them slowly lose health. I turned off concise descriptions. I'm pretty sure if concise descriptions was on... let's see. Where is... Wait, where is concise descriptions? I've lost it. Now I'm wasting time trying to find the concise descriptions thing. Here it is. I'm pretty sure then it just says, yeah, inflicts disease condition for 22 seconds. Because that's all it does. This is a 3. If you want to inflict diseased, this is a very good way of going about doing it. And certainly the longest duration way of going about doing it, as far as I know, are certainly way up there. That said, I don't tend to use this. I don't tend to be inflicting disease a whole lot. If you are trying to make a condition-oriented build, this might be a good choice. You might want to use something like Avatar of Grenth that inflicts a very short disease to trigger fragility a lot. So, I don't know, I would tend to use this more on a build that's applying conditions as pressure than ones that are trying to combo them with fragility. And I don't use this very often. I don't know. You want to be inflicting more than diseased, or it's very uninteresting. Soul Feast. 10 energy, 1 second cast time, spell, exploit nearest corpse to gain 234 health. This is an incredibly potent self-heal. And like most self-heals, it is a 2. It does do a thing. It heals you, and it heals you for an awful lot. But if I'm being blunt about it, I don't care. So Death Magic has a startling number of self-heals. I just don't have much use for Soul Feast. I want to exploit the corpse for something other than healing. I have healers with me to heal me. I don't need to spend a corpse on it. I'm in Death Magic. I can spend that corpse on minions. So that's what I want to do. And that's kind of the issue here. It is a good skill to give to the AI, however, by which I mean it's good for ArenaNet to have enemies that have Soul Feast because it makes them tankier by giving them a bunch of additional health and combats minions, and that makes it a little bit more interesting, but it's not a skill I typically use myself. Tainted Flesh. 5 energy, 1 second cast time, 0 recharge. There's no recharge on this one. It is an elite enchantment spell. For 39 seconds, target ally is immune to disease, and anyone striking that ally in melee becomes diseased for 13 seconds. This has dubiously been used in a build, a Tainted Flesh build in PvP, because it applies a lot of additional pressure when the warriors attack you, and you don't have to worry about the disease coming back to you. That said, I mean, this is a good way of inflicting disease against other human enemies, I guess. Frankly, keeping this up on everyone is a lot of work. If you don't keep this up on everyone and start getting diseased, you need to start applying it. The main times I would consider using this is if I'm going to an area where the enemies inflict a lot of disease on me. Or if I'm wanting to try to, if I'm wanting to try to get disease around, though, I just want to use, Rotting Flesh because it doesn't take up my elite slot. So, I'm going to give this one a 2. The effect is there, but it's not one I want most of the time. That's just kind of where it falls. Taste of Death. And if you thought Soul Feast was a self-heal, this is 5 energy, quarter second cast time, no recharge, spell, steal up to 340 health from target animated undead ally. Okay, so a couple of caveats here. First of all, this steals the health from your undead ally, which means if they have less than 340 health, you are getting all of it, and they dead. And you might not be getting the full amount of healing from this. In general, this is another... This is a 1 for me. I'm going to be honest here. So the reason why I'm giving this a 1 is because I don't need to self-heal myself this way. I don't need to blow up my minions to heal myself. There are other ways of self-healing and, like, Taste of Pain. The thing is, I'd rather use, like, Feast of the Dead or Putrid Flesh in order to blow up a minion for effect. Taste of Death is a way of doing that, and it can heal you for a lot, but I should be healing in another way. I don't want to be healing by eating my minions. I should be healing because I have a healer on my team that is healing me. Or I'm using some other Necromancer skill to heal me, potentially. This is a very potent heal, potentially. But you do have to have a pretty high level minion to be able to even steal that much health from it. So you have 100 health at level 1, and every level after that gives you an additional 20 health. So a level 14 minion is 100 plus 13 times 20. So that's going to be 360 HP, roughly. So this is probably killing your minion. You might be able to get the full health from it, but I don't know. It's an interesting effect. I think it's good to have it in the game. I just do not want to be doing this. Taste of Pain is 5 energy, quarter second cast time, 10-second recharge spell. If target foe is below 50% health, you gain 126 health. I'm going to be honest here. I don't like this one either. I like it a little bit better than Taste of Death, kinda. But again, I'm not a big fan of self-heals. I'm going to give this a 2 because I think it's a little bit better enough than Taste of Death to warrant it, but I'm never bringing this either. I've got people for the healing. They're called monks and ritualists or whatever else. There are other healing skills that I'd rather be working with than Taste of Pain. Again, this is very conditional. It's awkward to use. You have to target an enemy to be able to use it, and they have to be below 50% health for it to do anything. This is very close to a 1. Yeah, because this is not the... So if you are below 50% health, you gain 126 health, that is interesting. But the fact that it requires the target foe to be below that, that's not interesting to me. Toxic Chill. 5 energy, 1 second cast time, 5-second recharge, elite spell. Target foe is struck for 63 cold damage. If they are under the effects of a hex or enchantment, that foe becomes poisoned for 22 seconds. So one of the things you probably have noticed by now is that there's a small theme in Necromancer for under the effects of hex or enchantment, which I think is really cool because it means that you don't have to hex them, but you can to reliably get the effect. This is a very lengthy poison. The cold damage is kind of You're doing this more for the poison. This is a 3. It's a perfectly serviceable skill. It's also a very unexciting skill. You can see the name, though. Toxic, Chill, Poison, Cold. Discord deals a lot more damage. I'm going to want to pick that a lot of the time and work with that. So, perfectly serviceable, but very underwhelming. Virata's Aura. So, Virata is a Necromancer character in lore. You can find him where Galrath is after Galrath, or if you don't have the Villainy of Galrath quest active. And he's a Necromancer that's known for, like, particularly investigating minion stuff. So anyway, Virata's Aura is 33% HP sacrifice. Great. 15 energy, and reminder, that's max HP. You're sacrificing a third of your max HP. 15 energy, 3/4 second cast time, 30-second recharge, enchantment spell. All hostile animated undead in the area become bound to you. Virata's Aura ends after 264 seconds. When it ends, you lose your bond with any undead bound to you. 50% failure chance with death magic 4 or less. So, this is a skill that you can use to counter minion masters. Because they've made all these minions, and now you're like, oh man, all of these minions, what am I going to do? Oh, I know. I'm going to use Virata's Aura and steal all of those minions. Right? That's the way that this reads to me. It's like, oh, all of these hostile animated undead, they become bound to you. However, when this ends, those minions are no longer bound to you. They become masterless, I assume, or perhaps resume their original bonds. I'm not entirely clear on that. It doesn't matter because you probably killed the one that they were originally bound to. By the way, I should mention this. When you die, all of your minions become masterless. So you do want to keep your Minion Master from dying. That is why you might want to use the Dark Bond skill in Blood Magic. That makes minions take damage. It takes 75% of the damage that would be dealt to their master. So that is a very important thing to be aware of. When a Minion Master dies, all of the minions become masterless. Just remember that. When it says hostile, though, I assume this can steal minions from other Necromancers. I like this effect. I'm going to give it a 2. You're not using it unless you're going into an area that has a bunch of minions. So, for example, like the Grave Bane. There's some monsters in the sort of Vabi area that make a bunch of minions. And there are some other places where there are minions made where this might be fun to use and be like, hey, I'm going to take all those minions and have them now fight for me. In general, though, I'm not going to use this. This is a finicky sort of... Like, this is a nice skill to have for, like, PvP if, like, for some reason minions became really popular in PvP and it's like, okay, minions are popular. Now everybody's bringing a Virata's Aura Necro in order to be able to... stop, like, as a counter strategy because they're like, oh, all those minions are now my minions. It's a good skill to exist from that standpoint of having a counter strategy to a Minion Master, but I'm not typically going to be working with this. So yeah, I don't really use this, but yeah, there are some areas where you could. You need to research what the enemies use in the area first, or you need to know what the enemies use to know if they make minions, because if they don't make minions, this does nothing. Virata's Gaze. 5 energy, 1 second cast time, 5 second recharge. I wish it did not have a 5 second recharge. You'll understand why in a moment. It is a spell. If target hostile animated undead has a master, its bond to its master is broken, making it hostile to all other creatures. All creatures other than itself, to be clear. If it had no master, you become its master. 50% failure chance with death magic 4 or less. So this is really cool in that what it does is, like, that minion loses its master, and then I can make myself its master. The problem is it has that 5 second recharge, so it doesn't just switch allegiance to you. You have to, if it, most likely, you have to break its allegiance and then give it allegiance to you. You can use this with, like, Malign Intervention to be able to gain control of the minion made through Malign Intervention. If you're killing the foe and making one, that's questionable. This is a really cool skill. It's really flavorful. It sounds really awesome, but minions are, like, such throwaway things that it's in the fact that it's a 2-step skill, like, you have to use it twice to be able to actually take the minion. It's just a little too clunky, a little bit too much. I am going to give it a 2 because it does do things and it's kind of cool and it's a little bit of a counter strategy, but it's way too much work to really get working most of the time. Virata's Sacrifice. 15% sacrifice of your maximum health, 10 energy, 2 second cast time, 60 second recharge spell. For 9 seconds, your undead allies gain plus 10 health regeneration. All conditions are removed from those allies and transferred to you. If this spell is successful and you have control of 3 or fewer minions, it instantly recharges. So, this used to be the way that you kept minions alive. It functioned very differently at the time. I think it was actually still a bunch of health regen, but it had much shorter recharges and things like that. You can look it up on the wiki if you really care about the history. But suffice to say, it used to be the skill you used, and then it was punched into oblivion. And so now Blood of the Master is the skill you use. Giving your minions a bunch of that much health regen just kept them alive, and it allowed you to really keep a large army of minions alive. They will eventually overcome it, I believe. I think their health regen does go beyond 10. The effect of it caps at 10. So you can have 15 health regen. You're going to experience the effects of 10 of it, but if you gain, like, 6 health regen, you'll have -9. So it doesn't count, like, it still exists. It's still a negative. It just caps the effect of it, if that makes sense. But moving all of the conditions from them to you is kind of irrelevant. They probably don't have many conditions anyway. The big thing is that this lasts for 9 seconds. For 9 seconds, your undead allies gain a bunch of health regen. Big whoop. This, if you have 3 or fewer minions, then it recharges instantly. Okay. So then I have to spend, like, a few seconds later, like, I use it, and then 7 seconds later, I'm going to need to reuse it so that way it can finish casting in time. That's another 15% of my max HP and 10 energy, like basically every 9 seconds. This is not good. I'm going to give this a 1. They killed it. They killed this skill. 60-second recharge is way too long. I'm never using this thing. And I think that was their intention. I think their intention was to kill this skill. I kind of wish it wasn't. I wish that it still had some use, some function. But Blood of the Master is the way you keep your minions alive in builds these days. You're not going to use Varada's Sacrifice. You're not going to use Feast of the Dead. You're going to use Blood of the Master. And that's just simply that. It's unfortunate, but that's just how it is. They decided the skill shouldn't be a real skill anymore, and they made it too narrow it's too weak to be of any use. Okay. Vile Miasma. 10 energy, 1 second cast time, 15 second recharge, hex spell. Target foe is struck for 54 cold damage. If suffering from a condition, that foe is hexed with Vile Miasma and suffers -4 health degeneration for 10 seconds. This is okay. You definitely need to be getting the condition clause, but that's easy enough to do. I'm going to give this a 3. It's a very bored 3. It's a cool idea, right? Of like, oh, you're hit by some cold damage. If you're already suffering from condition, that infects you and drains your health, right? Flavorfully, it's really cool. Like, Necromancer has a bunch of really flavorfully cool but underwhelming spells. I actually kind of want to comment a little bit more on Varada's Sacrifice from a game design perspective. Taking something that's really, really powerful and nerfing it into the dirt is not... I understand the approach. If you cannot figure out how to take the effect that it was and make it viable, but if you can't... So, to be clear, sometimes an effect is too strong and you can tweak it down to be in a good spot, but sometimes an effect is such that it is on a literal knife's edge, where one way it is too powerful and the other way it's too small, and there's no way to get it just right in the middle. Like, sometimes it is literally the effect is impossible to properly balance. It is always going to be too strong or too weak. If a skill is in that category, which Varada's Sacrifice very well may have been, I'd have to look at the original to see how strong it was, but if it was in that category, then the response should be to change the functionality to something that might actually be balanceable, not to make it a worthless skill. That's my opinion on it. I don't like the way that the balance was done on this. I don't like the way balance was done on Smiter's Boon PvP version. We'll talk about that probably when I talk about Monk, just because it's an interesting story. But Varada's Sacrifice did not need to be destroyed. It could have been made still playable. If the original effect could not be balanced, you could have made it a different effect that could be balanced. That's all I'm saying. Okay. Vile Touch. This is 10 energy, 3/4 second activation time, 2 second recharge, skill, touch target foe to deal 56 armor ignoring damage to them. But why though? So here's the thing, right? This deals some armor ignoring damage, but it's 10 energy. I'd much rather use the blood magic things that cost me 10% of my max HP and have like a 3 second recharge and deal like 50 damage, but only cost 1 energy. I'd much rather use those than I'd like Vile's Touch. So that's what is that? Wallow's Bite and Touch of Agony, right? And I didn't like those. I don't like this one at all. I don't know who's supposed to be using this, except for Scarabs in the desert that have this skill on their bar. Which, to be fair, this is really good skill for AI to use, because I kind of like the enemies to use, because they'll spam this on you. It's like kind of garbage, but they don't care that it's kind of garbage, and the fact that it's armor ignoring damage can be really nasty. So, and like it gets through defenses, right? So it doesn't care about blind, it doesn't care about block, that sort of thing. That's really cool. I like that, but like I'm not going to use this. I'm going to give this a 1. It's just way too expensive. There are other alternatives in the Necromancer lines that I'd rather do this sort of effect with, and I don't even want to use those, so here we are. Virulence. This is 5 energy, 1 second cast time, 15 second recharge, elite spell. If target foe is already suffering from a condition, that foe suffers from disease, poison, and weakness for 13 seconds. Virulence is really cool. You definitely want to be running it with Epidemic, and you want to be figuring out what your base condition is, probably Bleed. Do not bring this to an area where enemies are non-fleshy, by the way. It is trash if all it's doing is inflicting weakness. It does do a lot of additional damage, but yeah, you definitely want to be using this with Epidemic. And yeah, I think I want to be using Bleed as my base condition, because the thing is, if you're using disease, poison, or weakness, you're losing a third of the effectiveness of this spell, right? Because this spell is to inflict 3 different conditions. That's what it does. And if you are like, oh, I am inflicting weakness and then using virulence, well, you're kind of losing out on a third of virulence's functionality, right? If you are using rotting flesh to inflict a disease and then you're using virulence, well, you're inflicting poison and weakness off of virulence, but you're not getting disease. So at that point, you might as well use the blood magic skill, Jaundiced Gaze, I believe it was, that inflicts weakness and poison on foes suffering from condition in an area of... No, Oppressive Gaze, excuse me. Jaundiced Gaze was the enchantment removal. But yeah, you might as well use Oppressive Gaze, right? This deals some damage and inflicts poison and weakness. Combining this with Rotting Flesh seems to me to be preferable to casting Rotting Flesh and Virulence. So, definitely think about what the base condition is. I recommend Bleed just that way you can get to that 10 degen and then get a lot of that additional pressure going on. So Virulence to me is a 2. It is a skill you need to build around. You can build around it, and it can be quite powerful, but you do have to build around it. You do need to think about what condition you're applying to actually make good use of it and that sort of thing. But I like this effect, and I like the space that's playing in it and what it is doing. So, yeah, that's that. Let's go ahead and move on to Well of Suffering. So Well of Suffering is 10 energy, 1 second cast time, 10-second recharge. Well spell, exploit nearest corpse to create a Well of Suffering at its location for 26 seconds. Foes in that area suffer -5 health degeneration. So all this does is health degen. Now keep in mind this goes up to like 6, maybe even 7 if you get your death magic high enough. That said, you are in death magic. Why are you not making minions? The other thing is Well of Silence also does not quite as good of health degen, but a pretty good mimicry of the health degen from this. Slightly longer recharge, granted, at 20 seconds instead of 10, but that's in curses. I'm more likely to want that than this, simply because in death magic, I'm probably exploiting corpses for minions, but if I'm in curses, I might not be exploiting corpses for minions. There's a good chance I'm not going to be. So at that point, that well becomes a lot more attractive. Plus, it shuts down shouts and chants as a nice bonus. So I'm going to give Well of Suffering a 2. The effect is strong, don't get me wrong, it's just in the wrong attribute. And that's really the problem here. If this was in blood magic, it would probably be a 3, maybe even a 4. But in death magic, it's competing with the minion resource, and that really cripples it. So, Well of the Profane. This is 25 energy, 3-second cast time, 10-second recharge. You'll see why is it so expensive. It is a well spell. Exploit nearest corpse to create a Well of the Profane at its location. For 18 seconds, foes in that area are stripped of all enchantments and cannot be the target of further enchantments. It is 50% failure chance with death magic 4 or less. This is the most potent anti-enchantment spell in the game, I would argue. I like the way that it works, though. It is a counter to enchantments. It is a very potent counter to enchantments. It says you cannot be enchanted, right? Foes in this area cannot be enchanted. If they have enchantments on them, those enchantments come off, and new enchantments cannot be applied while they're in that well. It lasts for 18 seconds. Very long, but it is a location. You can step out of that location and get your enchantments back. To me, this is a 2. It is an extraordinarily strong counter. Again, death magic, I'm making minions. It is cool in PvP. It is really a useful tool for the AI to have in PvE, but I'm not generally bringing this because Again, most of the time, I'm not needing like the nuclear option to remove enchantments. Mirror of Disenchantment on 1 or 2 Mesmers is probably enough, and if there's enough enchantments that I want something stronger than that, I'm probably going to be running something in like the Assassin line or the Dervish line or something like that. That does a little bit more. Maybe I bring another enchantment removal on like a third character or something. Like, I have options, right? And this is a very expensive option. But that said, it is extraordinarily powerful. If there's some area that has a bunch of enchantments that's giving you problems, dropping one of these, like, say, against Madness Titans, I think they're fleshy. They'll leave corpses. Dropping one of these there to stop the stupid, obnoxious Mirage Cloak spam, that might well be worth it. So, something to think about, but this is a very powerful option, just like Chillblains is. You kind of want to make sure you mean it if you're going to bring it, because it is very expensive and very clunky to use otherwise, and kind of overkill for a lot of what you want. And there are other things that you can be doing with those corpses when you're in Death Magic, making this useful. So, yeah. That said, I am kind of curious how it works with, like, 6 Death Magic. 13 seconds... It might be worth it to bring actually at low Death Magic. This certainly ain't, but this might be worth it to bring in an area where you do have some frustration with enchantments. So just keep in mind it is actually fairly reasonable even with low just functioning. 50% with Death Magic, 4 or less. So you need 5 Death Magic to make this reliable. I think it's probably okay for the purpose of, like, no, you don't have any enchantments right now. So, something to keep in mind, I guess. I still think it's a 2. It's not something I'm going to bring most of the time, because it is a very expensive way of removing enchantments. Withering Aura. 5 energy, 1 second cast time, 3 second recharge, enchantment spell for 17 seconds. Target allies' melee attacks cause weakness for 17 seconds. I like the 17s matching up there. This has a very low recharge. This is a good way to spread weakness around. Kind of. It does require melee attacks. That's very a specific restriction. It's really nice if you throw this on a Hammer Warrior because they like weakness, but they also have plenty of ways of inflicting it, so it's maybe a little redundant. I don't know. This is not terribly exciting to me. I'm going to give this... I don't hate it, but I'm going to give it a 2. The thing is, if I'm trying to inflict weakness, I have plenty of other options that do it that are a little bit less... specific than this, that are like, oh, I'm just going to do it to that group. Like Enfeebling Blood, for example, is generally going to be something I'm going to prefer to Withering Aura. But, I think Withering Aura is playable. It works. It does the thing that you want it to do, which is to inflict weakness, and weakness is quite useful. The fact that it requires melee attacks, though, is quite the detriment. So just something to keep in mind. If you are using a melee weapon as a caster, because it's like +5 energy and 20% longer enchant duration, you can, like, Withering Aura that sort of dude, and they can just, like, smack the, take their enchanting, like, axe or sword or whatever they're using. I mean, axe or sword, let's be realistic here. If you're using a melee weapon for enchanting mod, that's what you're using. Because they're the one-handed options. So you can take your axe or your sword and go, like, smack dudes that are in your backline to inflict weakness on them. That's cute, but I just rather bring Enfeebling Blood. I don't know. This is one of those skills that's like, that's perfectly fine. That's a nice effect, but, like, when am I ever going to use it? Well, I'm not. So that's kind of the problem that it runs into. Anyway, that heads and wraps up Death Magic, except for Rising Bile, which I need to test, but I'm going to do that after in the next video. So go ahead and come back for that one. But until then, everyone, take care. Goodbye.